Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Ranking the Albums. We're going to battle today. We've got the battle cries ready to go, and I've got the metal trio here today. First time ever appearing on a show on SOT. Rich Catino's in the house, of course, from Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles, Metal Asylum, and the Metal Hall of Fame, and from the Lair of the Alchemist, Mr. John Gaffney. Greetings, guys. How are you?
What's up,
Hello,
guys?
good morning.
We are talking Omen today. So, for those of you who have been around the block for a bit, obviously you probably remember the name Omen, a one of the great bands on the Metal Blade Records roster
hmm
in the
Got
mid
my record back
80s.
there.
What's that? Oh, there you
Got my
go. You got
record
the
back there.
80s.
Warning of danger.
There you go. And kind of disappeared for a while, came back, disappeared for a while, came back. I don't know what their status is today. They put out an album a few years ago, maybe a little more
Yeah.
than a few years ago now. So they kind of always reappear with a different lineup, but they reappear. So we'll see what the future holds for Omen. But we've got seven albums. So here's the deal. They've got seven full-length albums. They got the one EP. We're going to talk about the EP, but we're not going to include it in the ranking, but we will talk about it. And for those of you who are fans, you know that the EP has kind of been put onto the CD reissues of their
Yeah.
third album. So you can kind of get that as it's almost like one album at this point. So, but we will talk about it.
There's that edition too, which they put on warning of danger too.
Yep.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's out there. You can easily get it.
Yeah.
So very cool band. And let me just kind of talk about the classic lineup first. So the constant in the band all throughout the history is Kenny Powell on guitars. He's kind of like the main guy. J.D. Kimball was their original singer. What year did he pass away? I don't even remember.
2003,
2003. So he's been gone for over 20 years now.
yeah,
He was on their first few albums.
first three.
Jody Henry on bass and Steve Wittig on drums. That's kind of like the classic lineup.
Yeah.
So, and I do want to say the spark for this episode came from John. When John and I did another ranking show a couple months back, we kind of earmarked Omen as a band that we definitely want to tackle this kind of whole underground U.S. metal scene. We did Warlord recently, and then Rich and I were talking. He's also a fan, so I said, "All right, let's pull the three of us together and do this." So we got seven albums. Why don't we do three at a time, and then we'll do our number ones at the end. So, John, I'll start off with you. So, give us your seven, six, and five on the ranking.
All right. Okay, I'd like to say a word or two about Omen before we start. When Pete and I did our Warlord episode, I talked about how I'm a big fan of this type of underground uh, 80s cult metal. And usually when people come to me and they're like, hey, I've already listened to Black Sabbath and Judas Priest, and then I've listened to Accept and Anvil, they've gotten through that sort of second layer under the ground. Then I say, all right, now, the fun starts. And we did our Warlord episode. I talked about Warlord, and Omen is a band that always comes up when people talk about this kind of stuff. They mention Warlord, they mention Manila Road, and Omen is usually in that discussion too. And whereas Warlord was, I described them in our episode as having this kind of Diary of a Madman vibe to them, a little bit of a gothic overtone, gothic in the time period sense, not the style of music. Uh, Omen is a little bit more what some would say early power metal
Yeah.
before that term became
hmm
what we sort of know as today. Some people might even say speed metal. There's a lot of fast stuff, galloping, Iron Maiden. Think the faster side of Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and Accept.
hmm
Lyrics, total sword and sorcery on the early stuff, which is completely right up my alley. Uh, a little interesting piece of trivia. Kenny Powell, who's the only, like you mentioned, Pete, he's the only consistent member of the band. He founded the band. He's the guitar player. He's on every record. He also played on Savage Grace's EP, The Dominatrix. He was very briefly in Savage Grace. So, okay, like Pete mentioned, like a lot of these bands from this underground era, they released a bunch of albums, and they released some albums in the 80s. Unlike Warlord, who did not tour in the 80s, Omen did actually go out and play and tour and open up for some bands. But like a lot of those bands, by the time the late 80s rolled around, they disbanded, and then their catalog is really kind of spotty after that. The albums here and there with a rotating cast of lineup. Rotating lineup with Kenny Powell being the only consistent. Okay, so number seven for me is from 1997, Reopening the Gates. This was sort of a comeback record for them, thus the title. We're reopening the gates. We're back. Unfortunately, this is not a good record. It reminds me of where a lot of bands were in the mid 90s when metal had fallen out of the mainstream in the US. It wasn't on MTV anymore, wasn't getting the press that it used to get. And Pantera was the big band
Yeah.
carrying the flag for metal in the mid 90s. So you got a lot of bands that were from the 80s trying to adapt their sound and trying to change their sound. And that's what they're doing on this album. It's very sounds like carbon copy Pantera, dime store Pantera, groove metal.
Mhm.
It's just awful. I tried listening to it to refresh my memory on it, and it's a very difficult listen. It's not recorded particularly well. Doesn't sound at all like the band. Doesn't have any of the things that made them famous in the underground. Let's say none of that exists on here. The guitar player's son is the singer, and I mean, I guess he's good for this style of music, but it just totally doesn't fit. I give this a 0 out of 10. Avoid at all costs. I always feel bad with stuff like this because somebody, maybe in passing conversation, I mentioned to somebody like, "Oh yeah, you want to check out Omen? It's great." Battle metal, speed metal, early power metal, and then they accidentally find this somewhere and think, "What is this guy nuts? This is like,
If
nothing
you
like
did a
what he."
blind test, you would never
And
in a million years
exactly,
think
and
it
I'm a
was.
huge fan of this band, and I don't think I would have any idea that it was that. But there's absolutely nothing that sounds like them on this record. So that's a. I'm going to just throw this in my room here. That's a 0 out of 10. If I could open this window, I would have thrown it out the window. But okay. So number six for me then is going to be their most recent album. I do not have a physical copy of this. Hammer Damage came out in 2016. This one loses some serious points because the mix is not great. It's lo-fi, but not in a cool 80s cult metal lo-fi way. This just doesn't sound good. And the drum machine really is like an anchor on this record. For me, it just drags this down because the drum machine is stiff and cheap sounding. It just does not sound good to the point of distraction. Kevin Gutierrez is on vocals. He kind of sounds like Ripper Owens at times. He has that sort of scream in his voice. He also sang with Phantom X, so the vocals are okay. They're pretty good. And there are some decent songs on here. The title track, Hammer Damage, it's got some nice Maiden style riffing, big chanting, fist in the air choruses. Chaco Canyon, some great single note riffs, pretty epic vibe. Eulogy is a cool, slower neoclassical feel, some nice guitar lines. Reminds me a little bit of like Trilogy era Ingve. And the selling point for this, if you wanted to get this for just one song, for the instrumental AFU, very cool, nice harmonized guitar lines, killer epic riffs. There's this bluesy section where he goes into like a wah wah and starts playing like bluesy type riffs. I love instrumentals like this that aren't just about the guy soloing over the top. It's more about stringing together a lot of really cool riffs. And that song is very, very
And they
cool.
did some pretty cool instrumentals in this band. I almost wish they would.
Yeah, and there's a theme here that the instrumentals tend to be just these like this is A period, F
Yeah.
period, U period. What that means, I'm not 100% sure, but that seems to be a theme with them. And yeah, they have very cool instrumentals, just not guitar shredding. It's like just really cool riffs stringed together. All that said, not enough good songs on this one. Lands at number six for me. Drum Machine drags this down big time, and the general recording. So it gets a 4 out of 10 from me. Okay, next from 88 is Escape to Nowhere. Now, I mentioned that with reopening the gates, that it reminds me of how bands panicked in the mid 90s, bands from the 80s, and tried to change their sound. This also happened to a lot of bands in
Sorry,
the
guys.
80s where they release a couple records. They're not really breaking big or anything. Maybe somebody at the record label pressures them. Maybe the band starts to panic. There's pressure coming from somewhere. They hire a good producer. In this case, it's Paul O'Neill, who had produced Sabotage and would go on to work with TSO. And they make a very, very commercial 80s rock record. It reminds me a little bit of like Lizzie Borden, like Master of Disguise, that era, but not as good. I really love Master of Disguise here. The songs aren't quite as good. Uh, so if you're a fan of that, you might like this record. But if you're a fan of the classic Omen and you're looking for the high speed gallops and the all that kind of stuff, you're not really getting that on this record. There's way too many slow songs on the album. That drags it down. It's slicker sounding, but it's still pretty heavy. Coburn Farr is on vocals here. He also sang with Annihilator. He's got a cool, cleaner, lower range and with also some powerful screams. It's not easy. It's pretty cool, melodic, dramatic opener showing off the singer's range. They do a cover of Radar Love, which is completely unnecessary. I don't like when bands do covers,
And
especially
it's not terribly good, I
yeah,
gotta
it's
say.
not good. It's a song that I just don't want to hear anybody cover. Escape to Nowhere, slower, darker number. It's got a heavy double time part that's pretty cool. A nice solo. That sounds like classic Omen on there. There's not a lot of classic sounding Omen stuff on here. Cry for Morning. It's another slow, dramatic one with some cool, weird changes. Poisoned is a much needed fast one because, like I said, there's a lot. There's just too many slow ones. King of the Hill, really heavy riff, pretty aggressive at the end. So it gets a 5 out of 10 for me. If you're a fan of this kind of sound, you may like this a little bit more, but it just doesn't sound like classic Omen. It's too slick, too many slow songs, not enough of the things that I love about Omen. So that gets a 5 out of 10 for me. So that's my first three.
Cool. All right, Rich, over to you.
Well, I don't know if I can contribute much right now because I have the same ranking as John. And I have all the
Great
same,
minds think alike.
right? It's awesome. I have all the same thoughts. I have the reissue of Escape to Nowhere. Comes with two bonus tracks. You got the instrumental King. So that's one that's doesn't have the letters
Oh,
like you're talking about.
okay.
So it's got two other songs on here. So, I really don't know what else to say different about what you said. It's all the same thing, Reopening the Gates is very modern for that time. I even hear God smacking some of this stuff. Escape to Nowhere has all the faults you were talking about. Not too much of a fan of Coburn's voice either. Not, I mean, he was okay for Annihilator, I think, but for this album, it doesn't work so
It
much for
gets
me.
fatiguing after a while,
I
especially
think
when he's in
so.
his upper range. You just sort
Yeah.
of, it wears on you.
Yeah. I like the more melodic he does, the vocal
Hmm.
that he does. But I don't like the cover of Radar Love, like I said. White Lion actually did that very good, by the way. One
I
of the
would
few
agree.
times a band does a cover and it's killer.
Yeah.
Um, so what else? Hammer Damage, same thing you said, not a great mix. Only two members at that time too.
Yeah.
So that probably had some impact on the recording, right, and how those songs turned out. But it's better. It's better. It's more traditional Omen. So it's a start, but like you said, it's not a good mix. It doesn't sound well. Very flat sounding, right? The way it's delivered when I was listening to that compared to the other albums. So yeah, that's my three. Same as yours, John.
Okay. I'm going to vary just a little bit, but basically with the same albums here. I'm going to go with Escape to Nowhere as number seven. Uh, my problem with this album is I think the influence of Paul O'Neill is huge on this record, and it's almost like they were trying
Mm.
really hard to sound like Sabotage. Uh, Coburn Farr, he's okay,
Mm-hmm.
not too bad. It's not easy. Reminds me of Accept. I think he sounds really good on that particular track. Radar Love is not very good. Why are they doing covers already this early in their career? I just never, like John said, I'm never a big fan of that. With Escape to Nowhere, the title track, you're starting to hear this kind of dark, moody, Sabotage style sound.
Hmm.
You got little keyboards in the back. It's kind of like mid-paced and wanting to be a little theatrical. And I hear that throughout a lot of this album. This is 1988, so Sabotage is sort of breaking at this
Mm-hmm.
point in time. And to me, it's just like Paul wanted to do something similar here, and I don't think it works for this band because it basically saps the identity from this album.
Yeah.
But there's some decent songs on here. And Nomad sounds like Sabotage Light. It's just plotting, doesn't really go anywhere. King of the Hill, not too big. I like No Way Out a lot. I think that's a throwback to their earlier stuff. That's one of the tracks on here. That does remind me of their first couple albums, but overall, it's not a bad record. If this is where you come in with Omen, you might think this is really, really good. The problem is the three albums that come before it kind of set a high bar, and I think this just really takes them away from their classic sound. So
Yeah.
for me, this kind of misses the mark quite a bit. And I don't want to hear another Sabotage. There's only one Sabotage, and this band trying to do that just doesn't really work for me. And they broke up after this album for about a decade and came back for Reopening the Gates, which is my number six. Uh, yeah, it's just it's a Pantera ripoff. I feel the same way about this record as I do that Destruction. I think Destruction did two albums that also tried to be like Pantera.
Oh yeah.
And everybody was doing this because this was the
Yeah.
popular metal sound at the time. This is 1997.
Mm.
Um, for what it is, it's okay, but it doesn't sound like Omen at
No.
all. It's just thrashy groove metal. Saturday's pretty catchy. Crushing Day, Rain Down, solid, but it doesn't sound like Omen. So if you like this sort of thing, if you're a big fan of Pantera and you like that sound, you probably like this album. If you're, all about what that classic Omen sound, avoid this one at all costs. I don't think it's awful. It's just it's not a good Omen record, but for what it is, it's okay. Number five is Hammer Damage from 2016, their seventh album. You know, this is you got the two, like Rich said, this you got the two guys here. You got Kenny doing guitars, bass, drums, well, drum programming and everything else, and then you got Kevin Gucci. It sounds like two guys. Sometimes there's bands who have whittled down their lineup and they go into the studio and they create this big sounding album and you couldn't even tell that it was like one or two guys. Here you can tell it's just two guys.
Mm.
The drum sounds are awful. This is a really poorly recorded album.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
drums are horrible. They sound bad. They're too high in the mix. Um, but the weak production throughout the whole, I mean, the guitars don't even sound good. The riffs are really
No.
good. Here's the travesty about this album, guys. I think there's some really good songs on here, but
Yeah.
this is one of those instances where the production just really hampers your ability to enjoy a record. I think
Hmm.
Chaco Canyon is really, really good. Um, Cry Havoc is a great song, but man, the production is just terrible. It just sounds like a really bad demo. Eulogy is pretty good. I think Gucci, he's got some smoother melodic tones. He's got the gruff thing going on. He's trying really, really hard to sound like J.D. Kimball. Whether he does that or not,
Mm.
whatever. Hellas is really good. Caligula is another good one. And then we talked about the instrumental AFU. I think the songs are here. But man, the production just seals the fate on this one. I think if they were ever wanting to go back with a full band in the studio and redo this
Yeah.
album, they should because the songs are here. But it sounds awful. I could have rated this lower, but this has good songs on it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the production just absolutely kills it. So yeah, that's my number five. So
You know what label this came out on? Pure Steel Records. Do you remember that name?
I
Yeah.
remember the
I
name, but
know
I couldn't
Pure
tell you who
Steel.
was ever on there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Pure Steel, right? They're still around, I think, Pure
Are they
Steel
Yeah.
really? Yeah,
Records.
could
Yeah,
be.
I think so. I had a friend who had a band that was on that label,
Hmm.
but yeah, you're exactly right. Like that should have been demos that they give it to a full band to learn. The band goes into a rehearsal studio for 2 weeks, bangs it out,
Mhm.
and then they go into the studio and it would have sounded so much better. And it's a good case study. And like at what point, I'm a pretty tolerant person when it comes to production.
I
Uh,
usually am
es
too.
yeah,
Yeah.
especially if it's like as we move on here, some of these albums that I have higher ranked are technically not, greatly produced,
They're
but
not.
they have an atmosphere to them that I really like. There's like this, it's like a fine line between cool lo-fi albums that have a
But
cool
see,
vibe
John,
to
those
them,
are
and then it
raw.
flips over.
Those are raw, but they're played by real people.
Good
This
point.
sounds
Yeah.
just sterile and cold,
It
and
does.
Yeah,
it just doesn't work. It doesn't
But you
work.
know,
yeah.
too, though, some of those older ones, if you get remasters, sometimes they do sound a little bit better. It does improve the sonic quality and the production that they originally
For
did
me,
it
it's
with.
the drum machine on this. It just
It
sounds
kills
like
it.
Right. No,
somebody
I mean the
tapped.
older. I mean the older record.
It's just
Yeah.
terrible. It's just
Yeah.
terrible.
True.
But okay, so let me see. I'm 765. This is 432
Yep.
for me. Okay, four. I've got from 2003. I don't own a physical copy of this. Eternal Black Dawn.
There you
This
go.
comes after Reopening the Gates.
Mhm.
This is very much a return to the classic Omen sound. Kevin Guccier on vocals. Now, I meant to ask you guys before we started this. This is the same guy on vocals that was on Hammer Damage?
Yeah,
It does not sound like the same
I know.
guy at all. In fact, I did like this double take, like, is this an error? Like I was looking at Encyclopedia
I
Metallium.
mean,
I'm
there's
like,
many years between, but yeah, it doesn't sound like the
it
same guy.
does not sound like the same guy at all because for the most part here, he stays in this nice lower tenor, kind of clean voice with this nice kind of tone. You mentioned the original singer, kind of harkening back a little bit to the original
Yeah.
singer. He does very little of the screams that you hear on Hammer Damage. I much prefer him the way he sounds on here. A Thousand Year Reign is cool. Maiden Gallop, mid-tempo, epic chorus, Burning Times, driving 12/8 metal. That's kind of a signature of that kind of thing. Signature of their sound. I love the Burning Witches lyrics. I mentioned this earlier. There must be an Yngwie influence here with the guitar player because I hear like this sort of trilogy era Yngwie sound every now and then. House of Rue Royale, cool mid-tempo, kind of doomy number. Chorus maybe disappoints a bit. Second half of the record, everything starts to sound a little bit samey at that point. So it's really like the first half I like. The second half is okay, but it starts to get a little repetitive. So that's why this lands at number four for me. I give this one a 6 out of 10. The production is pretty good on this one. You know, it kind of sounds like it's early 2000s, but there's nothing wrong with that. I think the production is good and the songs come across pretty well. And I like Kevin's vocals here much better in this context than on Hammer Damage. It just kind of fits the vibe of the band for me. Okay, I'm on three. Number three for me from 1985. I do have this one. This is sorry, I should have put these in order beforehand. Where the heck is it?
Can I make a prediction?
Warning,
I was wrong.
warning of danger. This is 1985. Great old school production. More songs about battles and swords, which is kind of where I like this band to sit. Uh, The title track is a great driving battle metal number. March On, great classic metal. March On, Metal Warrior.
Mhm.
Lyrics like that. How can you go wrong? Don't Fear the Night. Cool melodic mid-tempo. Maiden Gallop, great vocal performance. VBP. Here's the instrumental thing again with the letters. Great fast burning instrumental. Premonition, kind of doomy. Side two intro. Chanting Monk vocals. I always dig that kind of stuff. Termination, ripping speed metal, cyborg lust, I think is what he says in the lyrics. Cyborg lust coming to seal your fate.
Mhm.
I love at the end of the song when it does the terminate, terminate, terminate,
And it
terminate,
fades
like the
out. Yeah.
robot vocal. Yeah, and fades out on that. Very cool. Make me your, what is this? I can't read what I said here, what I wrote here. Uh, Make me your king.
Make me okay.
I can rule with an iron hand. That's a great line. Red Horizon, another ripping fast one. Totally cool halftime chorus that comes in and kind of the middle of that. So this is very cool. Love this. This is the classic band at this point. You can see the guys on the back here.
I got the same vinyl.
This gets a solid 9 out of 10.
Love the artwork too.
Yeah, the artwork is
Great
great.
cover.
Great on this.
Yeah.
So this gets a solid 9 out of 10 for me, only because the rest are that much stronger that this one lands there. I did want to mention that they also appear on Metal Massacre #5.
Right.
Not sure if this came out before their first album, but they have the opening track on here, Torture Me, which is on their first record. And as I mentioned with Warlord, this is kind of a common thing with Brian Slagel back then that he would put a song on a Metal Massacre album to get a feel for how people reacted to it. Okay, I'm number two. Number two for me is The Curse. Uh, this is the last with the original lineup with J.D. Kimball on vocals. This is their third record. It's his voice for me has he has he doesn't have a super high pitched voice, but he has this sort of fullness to his sound and just the right amount of aggression in his voice when he gets kind of in his lower range. Reminds me a little bit of Manila Road at times. Great production, just the right amount of reverb to add the atmosphere and vibe that I like. The Curse, great double bass drum blaster. Must I kill again tonight? That's a great line. Kill on sight. Metal music, the power we defend. I mean, come on, with lines like that, how can you not love this stuff? Another fast one, great riffs and leads. Holy Martyr, awesome bass intro, epic riffs and playing. There's great bass playing all over this record in general.
Yeah.
Eye of the Storm, mid-tempo, more epic metal. I love the acoustic guitars in the middle section, adds this sort of triumphant feel to it. Here we go with another instrumental, SRB. Awesome, tons of killer riffs and changes moving back and forth. Uh, there's a thunderclap in it that's really cool that leads into a slow part. Teeth of the Hydra, powerful vocals. From the teeth of the Hydra come the children of the damned. I mean, great lyrics. At all cost, uplifting. This is interesting. At all cost, after all this like battle, I'm going to crush your head. This isn't a line from Omen, but I'm going to storm into battle and take over your castle. We get at all costs this sort of uplifting, positive lyrics. Don't separate yourself from your dreams. Don't give up. Don't give in. I just thought that that was cool that you just sort of get this uplifting number in the middle of it. Bounty Hunter, great chorus. The Lark, just a slow little instrumental that takes that record out. Love this. This is classic early 80s underground metal at its best. Awesome. Maybe this cover isn't as good as the other one, but this is a solid 10 out of 10 for me. Love this record. Comes in at number 2 for me.
And if you get the remaster edition, you get the Nightmares EP on it.
Yeah, if you get the remaster, which by the way, if
Yeah.
you want to get the record,
Yeah.
it's a pretty cool EP because it actually has 4 new songs. Bounty Hunter is off of one of the other X, and they do a cover a whole lot of Rosie, which it
Yeah.
sounds like it's live. I don't know if it really is, but I mean, do we really need that? I guess it sounds okay. But you're getting, 5 songs on here for an EP. That's pretty good bang for your buck. So if you do stumble across it in a
Yeah, and they're
record
really good
store.
songs too.
Yeah, and they
Mhm.
are. They're really good
Yeah.
songs. So they fit right in with the sound of that era, and it shows up on the Curse EP for anybody out there wondering. These are all on streaming too, except for Reopening the Gates. I believe that's the only one that isn't on streaming. But all right, that's my 432.
432. All right, Rich, back to you.
Okay, my 4 is the same with yours. So I got Eternal Black Dawn. It's definitely a return to their traditional style. I like the songs on this too. Could be a little bit better production and mix, but it's not bad. Eternal Black Dawn, I like. Burning Times, House of Rue Royal, Chains of Delirium are ones that I usually go back to. And this was actually on Mausoleum Records, another popular record label at the time,
Yeah.
right? Who
Oh
was
yeah,
putting
very
out a
much
lot of
so. They
stuff.
released a ton of stuff in the
Yeah,
80s of varying quality. Some of it not good at all, some of it really cool
right.
classic stuff. But Mausoleum was one of the, I believe, were they from Belgium? I think that label. I'm not exactly sure, but
Belgium or France, I thought.
yeah.
Were they?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this was a much needed return for them. So same placement for you, John, with that one. Now my next one's different. I'm breaking the cycle here. So my 3, I'm going with Battle Cry
Ooh.
because I do like the songs. I like the energy. It's raw, it's heavy, it's rough, but it doesn't have the refinement that the next 2 albums have, which I like better. So I still go back to this regularly, like Death Rider, The Axeman, Last Rites, Dragon's Breath, Be My Wench. Great songs. Battle Cry, Die by the Blade, all ones that I regularly go back to. But it just, like I said, it doesn't have what the next 2 have. I think it's just missing the vocal quality, the more of the soaring, epic, melodic feel to what it was. But musically, it's cool. It's a good start, I think. It's a good beginning. I think they got better as they went to the next 2. And then if you get this reissue version, you get another bonus track on this also, a live track, which was a Metal Blade also.
Yeah.
I like the wraparound artwork too, right?
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't get this at the time when it came out. This was not my introduction to the band. I went backwards to get this one.
It's
And then
yep.
what's that?
It's the same for me. I started
Same,
with
yeah.
yeah, The Curse was my first album that I got.
Okay. So then my number two is The Curse, which I really, really like a lot. This is another remaster edition of it, where, like I said, you got the Nightmares EP. I really like the vocals on this thing too. I like the way it goes back and forth from, it's kind of that rougher edge to the vocal, but he also does the singing, which is really nice. It's a better delivery, I think, than Battle Cry, the way the vocals are sung to go with the music. And the music evolved a little more too, because Battle Cry is a little more straightforward. This gets a little more epic, a little more US power metal, right? Let me see. So I really like the opener, The Curse. Great opener. Kill on Sight. Eye of the Storm is awesome. The instrumental SRB. I love the way when you get to this album, you get that interplay between the bass and the guitar, right?
Yeah.
The little stuff going on. It's so good on this record, and they do that a lot. What else? Teeth of the Hydra, also At All Costs. Destiny Bounty Hunter is great. Um, so yeah, this is my number two. I go back to this a lot, and I really like the remaster. If you can get it, it definitely improves on the sonic quality. It's not a remix, but it definitely helps because you guys were talking about how, the production for these Metal Blade albums were not the greatest at the time. But if you listen to it on vinyl or like Warning of Danger, it does have a little bit of a different delivery. Like if you're listening to it on a cassette, it's terrible production, right? It's definitely not as good. But you go to like a remaster or a CD version of it on a real speaker system, it does sound pretty good.
There's definitely a characteristic of all those Brian Slagel productions
Yeah.
from
Yeah,
the era, right? They all have it. And it's
yeah,
like I guess if you kind of grew up listening to this stuff, they're fine for
mhm,
what they are. Maybe obviously there are other producers that have way more budget and were able to do more interesting things
yeah,
that are maybe a little bit more pleasing to the ears. But I think there's a lot of people who love this kind of raw metal from this time period.
Hmm.
And
yeah,
it's indicative of the times for sure.
yeah.
And I do
So
want to
give
bring
it.
something up because you both kind of mentioned it, but especially Rich. There is something about these first three albums that kind of like lead bass
Hmm.
kind of
Yes,
factor that's going on here, which
it's
it's
almost a
pretty
Steve
clear,
Harris. It's almost a like
100%.
a Steve Harris kind of thing, right?
It's pretty clear that these guys were big Maiden fans from those
Yeah,
first two
Yeah.
albums. And you know what? One of the things I really miss from early Iron Maiden is that when
Yeah.
yeah,
Steve Harris did this kind of like
Oh yeah.
gymnastic, acrobatic bass
mhm,
lines that kind of weaved around the guitar
Yep.
riffs.
yeah,
And I'm not just talking about, Steve Harris, the dung, 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 dung. I mean, he's done that
Right.
for decades, but
yeah,
he was doing some really complex, exciting stuff on those first couple of Maiden records. And I think these guys got it. And there's a
yeah.
lot of that on these first couple albums.
That song "Eye of the Storm," like I said, is one of them. When I listened
Yeah.
to it today again, I was like, "Wow, that's really cool how they work together."
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
There's nothing, I mean, John's a bass player, he knows. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with starting a song off with a cool bass line, right?
Yeah,
And
Yeah.
not just just playing one note over and over real slow. I mean, I'm talking about
yeah.
something serious, right? So
Well, you
that's
hear it throughout the song too. Not only just like it begins it, but then as you're listening to the song and you go through the verses and the chorus,
yep,
it weaves itself in between the guitars. Great.
yep.
Yeah, if you're a fan of this type of early metal and you like bass playing, I recommend the band Deaf Dealer. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this band,
No.
DEAF Dealer, and they had an album called Keeper of the Flame, and it's like this. It's very much
Mm.
like Omen, but the bass is really like, it's another album that sounds like they were straight up in, early Iron Maiden influence. So if you're discovering Omen and you dig Omen, check out Deaf Dealer, not
What
Deaf
what year was
Dealer.
that released, John?
That was let me see, 86, Keeper of the Flame, which I believe is their first record. And I think they were a band. I mean, gosh, I'm looking at it here on the internet. Even well, I don't know if this is the bass player, but there's some dude in the band that looks just like Steve Harris.
Hmm.
So that's 86. I don't know sure
Oh,
what
Canadian
label.
Canadian band. Wow, okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure what label they were on. Were they yeah, Quebec. They're from Quebec.
So their
Not sure
first
what
album was
label.
on Mercury.
Whoa.
Go
Wow,
figure.
really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh
Yeah.
wow. I didn't realize they were on like a semi on a major label. Yeah,
Like they
Mercury,
only had the two
86.
records. They had Keeper the Flame on Mercury in '86, and then Journey into
Yeah.
the Year on
Spell that
Quebec.
again for me.
DEAF, dealer, Dealer. If you like this early Omen stuff and you like bass playing as I do, you should definitely check that record out. It's got all kinds of Steve Harris stuff all over
Oh,
it.
I do remember the artwork, but I
Yeah,
don't think I've ever
just
heard
a
it.
little bonus for everybody out there here on Sea of Tranquility.
And I see
And you were talking to
copies are available on Discogs, folks. So
Yeah,
cool.
there you go.
as
And you were
everybody
talking
rushes to their
about
computer to start checking this out, right?
and you were saying early power metal, John, too.
Yeah, very much so.
And
Very much
like
like this early Omen stuff. Power metal, what they considered power metal in the mid
US.
80s, basically, right, which
Right.
basically meant you were playing fast, it was tight, it was pretty clean, like in the
Yeah.
playing, maybe some harmonized guitars.
Yeah.
The vocals are kind of epic and everything. It's not really, when we say power metal, don't think it's like the modern power metal where it's just constant double bass drums and some guy singing super crazy high. In fact, a lot of these bands like Def Dealer, if I remember correctly, he's got
Right.
sort of that more mid-range but tough sounding,
Yeah.
kind of clean, mid-range, tough sounding voice.
Well, I was going to say that about Omen as opposed to the European power metal, which would have been
Yeah,
Halloween at the time.
Right.
yeah,
So it's not those kind of vocals, and
right,
it's got the
exactly.
same. It's got the harmonies and things, but like Halloween, you have a lot of that bass, the fun bass lines going on, like early Halloween on Walls of Jericho,
Yeah, for sure.
like Omen did with the Curse and Warning of Danger, right?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, slight little parallel, just without the high melodic vocal and the
Yeah,
keyboards that would come later in Halloween.
yeah,
All right. My number four is also Eternal Black Dawn. I actually stumbled upon this in the used CD bins at Rock Fantasy about a month and
yeah,
a half ago. And I was like, I don't remember ever seeing this anywhere. And I scooped
No,
this up for $5. I was like, yes, this is
that's
the Crash music release because I think Mausoleum was released over in Europe and Crash here in
mhm.
the States. But yeah, I mean, I think this is a really good return to form. I agree with John. I think that Kevin Guccier sounds very different on this record. He's doing more of that kind of like streamlined mid-paced, does some higher pitch stuff, but he's not screaming at all. I think it's
hmm
really good. I think he sounds
hmm
really good on this. There's some great tracks on here. I love King of the Seven Seas. Reminds me of Merciful Fate a little bit, at least musically speaking. Chains of Delirium is really good. I think 100 Year Reign, the opening track, just sounds like classic Omen. It's really,
It
really
does,
good.
yeah.
The guitars are great. Production's pretty good. Blood Feud's got some smoking lead guitar. I like it. I like the fact they're still using the old logo. I like the cover art. A good,
Great
solid,
artwork.
solid Omen album. And that's number four for me. All right, so now we get into the top three. Obviously, the first three could change at any time. They're all three of them are really, really
yeah,
great. I'm gonna side with Rich here. I'm gonna go with Battle Cry at number three. I like it a lot. It's raw. It's so heavy. I think the songwriting would get a little tighter, a little more
Mhm.
refined on the next two records. That's probably the reason why I've got this at number three, but don't get me wrong, it's a great record. Death Rider is a great song.
hmm
I think Kenny Powell's guitar playing right from the get-go is just fantastic. He's a really underrated player. He comes up with great riffs. His solos are smoking. A lot of new wave of British heavy metal flair on this album. I think Last Rites is perfect. I think if you're a fan of the first two Maiden records, a lot to love here. The Axeman is great. Dragon's Breath is chugging really good.
Yeah.
By My Wench, fast paced. Title track is a great headbanger. Die by the Blade, to me, could have come off the first Maiden record. Just really, really good. Prince of Darkness, man, love those opening bass lines. Really, really good album. Really, really good album. I could totally see it being a number one for obviously John. So I can't argue that at all. Uh, it was really tough between my one and two because I love them both pretty equally, but I ultimately went with The Curse, which was my introduction to this band. I played this to death when it first came out and then went backwards. Third album, great production on it. Well, great. compared to maybe the first two. But it
Mhm.
still has that rawness to it. But I just think it sounds a little bit better. I think JD has really improved as a singer on here. The guitar work is great. The drumming is really good on this. Holy Martyr is terrific. Eye of the Storm sounds like early Queensryche, obviously without Jeff Tate, but musically speaking. Kill on Sight, one of my favorites from here. Teeth of the Hydra is so good. That probably back in the day was my favorite song on this album. I love the instrumental SRB, whatever the hell it stands for. At All Cost is majestic. Bounty Hunter, total headbanger. Sadly, the last album with the original lineup.
Yeah.
And then we see obviously total different changes going forward. But and I always kind of dug the album artwork, the cover art, and
Yeah.
cool pictures of the band on the inside or whatnot. And like
Yeah.
Rich mentioned, this reissue comes with the EP on here, which is pretty
Mhm.
neat to have it all in one set. So that is my 432. And
Pete, when you were listening to it, did you listen to it with the remaster, or did you listen to it just on YouTube or Spotify or something?
well, I mean, I've had this for a while, so
Right.
yeah. But I think over the last couple of days, because I always go and refresh right before we shoot. I
Yeah.
listened to it on YouTube, which came from this because you can get, but it's
Right.
obviously sounds better on your own system and whatnot. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Like I
it's a
was
good
saying
sounding
before.
remaster. I really think it did a pretty good job.
Yeah. When you listen to it on a real, speaker system with an EQ and whatnot, even if you turn it off, it does sound a little bit better.
Yeah,
Totally.
and I had the vinyl. I bought the vinyl of this way back in the day
Hmm.
when it first came out, and I remember thinking it always sounded pretty decent, but you could tell it
Hmm.
was like a little rougher production
Yeah.
compared to some other stuff that was coming out in the time.
Yeah.
Obviously around this time, you're buying Metallica albums and all this other
Yeah.
stuff. But I always thought it was a really, really good album, and it was a real toss up to me between my one and two. So, John, talk about the debut.
Okay. Well, maybe I have sentimental memories of this because I bought this when I started getting into collecting metal vinyl, like around 2000, 2001. I saw this in my used record store, and just this cover. I mean, this
Yeah.
is your
It's
friend,
so.
and it's almost a legendary bad cover, but I love it. It's like your friend in high school. Remember, you had those brown paper bags you put on your books at
Oh
school,
yeah.
Yeah.
and you had that friend that could kind of draw. Well, this was the kind of stuff that he was drawing on his social studies book in school.
But
But
dude, I love that old 80s artwork style though. There's so many
absolutely, it's
bands
like
that had it. I love
innocence.
it.
Yeah, it has this, and I always say this all the time, like about stuff from this era
Yeah.
when I'm telling people to check this stuff out, I always say, listen, it's not going to sound like some modern recording. It's not even going to
Mm.
sound like some bigger band from the 80s, the production values that they would have. But I view this stuff as it's almost like an archaeological dig. You're digging this stuff up.
Totally.
It's primitive, but it's a sign of the times, and it's like a time capsule. These guys are trying to
Yeah.
do this before the internet, before any other sort of references. They're just sort of making it up as it's happening, taking their influences and just making their own thing. So, yeah, is it rough around the edges? Does it lack some frequencies here and there? Of
Mm.
course, but to me, it's just that just adds to the charm for me. You don't walk into a museum and look at some primitive Viking helmet from 1,000 years ago and go, "Oh,
Yeah.
that looks stupid. The one eye is bigger than the other." And no. You look at it and you're like, "This somebody wore that into battle. This is
Yeah.
so cool." You respect it for what it is.
And
So
what's
this
cool
for
too, man? I'm sorry. If
no,
you
no.
look at their logo, their first logo, you got the snake in there too, which is really
Yeah, and I
cool.
love how it's like in a scroll
It's
here
awesome,
like
man.
this.
It's
And if
so
you see
awesome.
the inside of
Yeah,
the lyrics on the inside are written in like sort of, kind of a cool font.
that's
But
great.
yeah, this is a solid 10 out of 10 for me. This is released in 1984. I made this note here. I said, this is the type of music a medieval blacksmith would listen to while pounding red hot steel into a sword. I mean, it's just
That's
battle
perfect.
metal at its best.
Yeah.
Simple but atmospheric metal vibe to the whole thing. Death Rider, fantastic old school classic metal. I mean, this is the stuff that this is a band like Warlord over in Greece and Germany. They're worshipped like gods. And it's because of songs like Death Rider, just classic old school metal, great chorus, galloping chords. It's sort of their hit, if you will. When they play live, they open up with this song sometimes. The Axeman, another one, the epic spoken word intro. You got to have that on a record like this. Another great chorus, Bow Down to the Axeman. Just this iron fist in the air type of vibe. Last Rites, ripping fast metal. Dragon's Breath, the classic sort of eighth note metal of da 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 da, just great da 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 da, great stuff. Evil menacing vocals. Be My Wench. Maybe the title is a little bit laughable, but it's some great riffing. Battle Cry starts off with some guitar dive bombs, and then you get into the song. Lyrics like "Smell of death lingers in the air." Fantastic. Die by the blade. No way of escaping my steel. I mean, enough said. Like Stanley would say, enough said.
Enough said.
Uh, Prince of Darkness, more speed, no time to rest when there's battles to fight. I mean, this is just like, we're not pausing to catch our breath here. In the Arena, great epic way to end the album. This time we get some Gladiator lyrics thrown in there because, you can battle in it during any time period. So I just love this record. I love the vibe of it. Favorite 80s cult metal records. This would definitely land in my top 10. Solid, chisel it in stone. 10 out of 10.
Do you guys have the remaster that I have?
I only have it on vinyl, but I have listened to
Oh,
it on streaming, so I don't know if that's
that's what
too.
comes with the remaster. You got some
Oh,
pictures, you
oh,
got some
cool.
liner notes, you got the artwork larger. It's very, very cool.
Wow.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
got an earlier CD edition, Rich. I don't have that one.
Yeah, if you
That's
can
very
get
cool.
this, it's still out there. Get it. It's great. And then you have your lyrics on the back, like you showed in
Yeah.
your CD.
Yeah, very cool. I wish more
Yeah,
CDs would do that because then that gives
I
you
know.
like the vinyl experience of seeing the cover
Exactly. Like fold
enlarged.
out posters that they used to come
Yeah.
with, right? Sometimes.
Yeah, very cool.
I was just reading the liner notes, trying to see who did the artwork because this is very familiar to Manila Road covers, isn't it?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
And I was
Yeah.
wondering if it's the same artist. Very stylistically similar.
I have a feeling that this was just a buddy of theirs from
Uh-huh.
from high school.
It's
He
great
he
though.
he
I love
drew
it.
it up between pumping gas at the gas station. He drew this up really quick for the guys, but it's classic. I mean, it's just absolutely
It's
Yeah.
even
legendary.
colored very strangely. If you really look carefully at it, the colors are
Yeah.
just like haphazardly done. But yeah.
Great stuff. Okay, so
You're number one, Rich. Go for it.
My number one is the one behind me, Warning of Danger. That was my introduction to the band. So these songs are like burned into my head. I can't get them out. All of them. There's nothing that's bad on this record. But my favorites are Warning of Danger, March On, like you were saying, John. It's such a triumphant feeling song, right? Like
yeah,
you're marching to war, right? Love Ruby Eyes of the Serpent. I love the vocal on that. I love the way he sings it, his projection, right? This album is I like the vocals the way they're projected. They're really good. Termination is nice and fast and heavy. Make Me Your King, another epic feel to it. Um, yeah, this is flawless for me. It's my number one.
nice.
Yeah, it's tough because I like the Curse too because like I said, they evolved by these two albums, and
Yeah,
there's more singing going on, more epic projected
yeah.
feel to the vocal. The range. I really like it. So it's tough, but yeah, I have to go back to Warning of Danger always.
You kind of can't go wrong with the first three, really.
Yeah,
If you grab anybody out there listening, if you see the first three anywhere on vinyl or CD, just get it because
yeah.
you won't be
The
let down.
instrumental VBP, I don't like it as much as the one that's on the next two albums, but it's still a cool instrumental. I like the one on the Curse better.
Yeah, they do good instrumentals. It's like
Yeah.
I could probably listen to a whole album of them doing stuff
Yeah,
like that. That's how
yeah,
good they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, by process of elimination, Warning of Danger is my number one as well. It's right up there with the Curse. The both of them I just love. They're both. I mean, all three of the first albums are really good.
Mhm.
Um, to me, this is one of the most underrated metal albums of the '80s, and you could say this band is one of the most underrated bands of this time period. I love the kind of like new wave of British heavy metal, early Iron Maiden swagger all throughout this record. I mean, you
yeah.
got more of those. The Make Me Your King's got that great opening bass line, man, just so good. I love the instrumental. Don't Fear the Night is another good one. Ruby Eyes of the Serpent is just
I
total
think it's my
speed metal.
favorite.
Oh, great song. March On is a great opener. I love the lead guitar on here. Hell's Gates is terrific. Termination is just totally killer. Love
Yeah. The
those in
hook.
track, man. It's amazing how heavy these albums are.
Yeah. But
Um,
melodic. but
Yes,
melodic.
very melodic. Yes, very
Yeah.
melodic and really, really underrated guitar playing on here. It's
Hmm.
really good stuff. The riffs are great. I mean, Red Horizon's a perfect example. I mean, it's just really intricate riffing on there. It's just so good. So yeah, Warning of Danger is my number one. But like I said,
Nice.
first three are amazing.
Yeah.
Mandatory must-haves.
And you know what I meant to mention too when we were talking about the curse, like Holy Martyr. Do you guys get like Diamond Head vibes sometimes?
Yeah, a little bit of a new wave of British heavy
Right?
metal
Yeah,
via
Especially that
Iron
song.
Maiden type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Yep.
sure.
I
Before we
got
go,
Teeth of the
guys.
Hydra going around in my head right now. It's
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we go, guys, I want to recommend something, and I really meant to bring this book with me, but I'm not at my normal lair location, as people might be able to see. But I cannot recommend this book enough for people who might be into this type of thing. I just got it myself a couple weeks ago. It's called Heroes of the Metal Underground, the definitive guide to 1980s American independent metal bands. It was released by a guy from Greece in 2023. It's 520 pages of
Wow.
albums, him talking about bands from the American underground metal scene. And when I mean underground, about 75% of these bands, the majority of the bands in here are self-financed releases. These bands weren't even on any record label.
Oh wow.
He dug up all these bands that just released, an album on their own, the majority of them. There's some of them that were on bigger labels. He has pictures of the band. He interviews people in the band. How on earth this guy found these people is beyond comprehension. Cheers to this guy for doing this. He's not even really a metalhead. The dude's a punk rocker, but he just loves like independent, underground, self-financed, self-released things. And it's just a fantastic book. It's broken up into East Coast and West Coast. Each band gets a couple pages. You see it, the album covers, a picture of the band. It's fantastic. You sit down, you open it up, you can jump to anywhere, read about a band, and then you can go on YouTube and usually find like their EP or whatever it is that they released and check them out. There's not much hair glammy stuff. It's mostly like classic metal stuff, all from the 80s, all US. Can't recommend this book enough. I wish I had the copy here to show you because it's just this thick tome of
It's only
just
25 bucks on Amazon and it's got tons of really high ratings.
yeah, get it, everybody. If you're into this kind of thing, I pride myself on being like somebody, I don't have every record that was released in 80s cult metal, but I pride myself on being somebody who at least recognizes the band name and sort of, oh
Mhm.
yeah, I know them. I heard them. I blah, blah, blah. I mean, this thing, I was just like, I never even heard of these guys. And I'm looking them up on YouTube and I'm like, whoa, this is so cool. You go on Discogs and you look and they released a vinyl in 1985 and there were only 100 copies pressed and it goes for like $8,000 now. So a lot of this stuff is
Wow.
just completely unattainable. But most of it's on YouTube. I mean, I haven't gone through every band, but a lot of it's on YouTube. It's just a super cool kind of really, I mean, if you think Omen and Warlord are like, digging below the surface, this is like
Yeah.
we're at the core of the earth here. We're like, how on earth this guy, I want to interview this guy for my channel. Pete, you should maybe reach out to this guy too, because I just want to know how on earth did you
I know all this
find
stuff.
these people? Because it's amazing. It's a real time capsule of its time. So highly recommended book for everybody out there.
Cool. I definitely am going to look into this because, yeah, 500 pages. Woo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have a lot of bands we never heard of before, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Awesome. So, guys, this was a really good ranking here, I think, for those
Yeah.
watching. If you are aware of these albums, if you know these albums, rank them as you like them down in the comments below. And if you've never checked out any records from Omen, well, I think you have a clear indication of where you should start your journey, right? So for the first three, obviously, right off the bat, as John said, just go out and get them if you find them out there.
Yeah.
So really, really good stuff. John, what's going on over at Lair of the Alchemist? Any what's happening
Just the
there?
same thing, talking heavy metal, talking hard rock. Gonna try to make it out to that Led Zeppelin movie that's in the IMAX theaters. Not sure if you guys are gonna check that out. I want to try to catch that this
Yeah,
weekend, maybe do a discussion on that. I've got my Black Sabbath podcast I do with my friend Darren, Into the Void, a Black Sabbath podcast. I've got the AC/DC podcast that I do with Martin Popoff, who's a regular here at Sea of Tranquility, Kicked into Teeth, an AC/DC podcast, and I do an Iron Maiden podcast with my Swedish buddy Matthias called a pod somewhere in time. So if you're into podcasts, look those up. They're on all the streaming services.
Cool. Very
yeah,
good. Rich, how about you? I know Rich and I have a the next installment of the New Wave of Traditional Heavy Metal Primer coming up, I think, in 2 weeks. Rich will talk off camera about scheduling that. So that's
right.
coming up. And what's going on over at Metal Asylum
Doing
and
that.
Billboards and
Metal Asylum's been kind of quiet. It's the new year, but we did a video, me and Jack Mangan, we did a video about new music that came out in January and February. A lot of new music. Got a couple of reviews I'm sending into Brave Words, a new article over at the Metal Hall of Fame. So that's keep me busy for the rest of February.
which will be done before you know it.
Yeah.
Just started.
And I got to start working on listening to more of that new traditional heavy metal bands now.
Exactly.
John,
Exactly.
are you familiar with them? All those bands, that
Uh,
new wave that's out there.
Yeah, back about 10 years ago, I had a band myself that was doing that stuff, and we
Okay.
released 3 CDs on
Oh,
Shadow Kingdom Records. So when I was doing that, that stuff was really starting to take off. So I'm familiar with like those bands from like about 12 to 15 years ago, like Enforcer and like
okay.
those bands that were doing that because
Striker.
we were kind of in that sound. My
Hmm,
band was called Sinister Realm for
cool.
anybody out there interested. And yeah, so but then I kind of drifted away from it, to be honest
Hmm,
with you. And I find myself when I want to get a fix for this type of thing, I find myself going to stuff like Omen, and
hmm.
that's what I enjoy is just discovering these obscure 80s lost in time
Yeah.
bands. So honestly, I'm slightly out of touch with what's currently happening in the new wave of traditional heavy metal scene. But yeah, I do enjoy that stuff because at my
Some really
heart,
good
I'm a
bands. There's just
traditional metal
so
guy.
many of them. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
I know,
popping
right?
everywhere.
So
Yeah.
many.
Cool. So thanks for watching, everybody. If you liked this trio here, maybe we'll bring you another ranking in the not distant future. I'm going to talk to them off camera about two
Cool.
that just come to mind. So
I have one that came to mind too.
there you go. See that? So
Stay tuned, everybody.
I'm already
stay
thinking.
tuned. Stay tuned. So thanks for watching. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together all the damn time. Stay tuned for In the Prog Seat coming up on Tuesday night. We're going to take a look at two great albums from 1975 that are celebrating their 50th birthdays and anniversaries this year, and they're both by the same band. Fly By Night and Caress of Steel from Rush. That's coming up on Tuesday
Cool.
night. Don't miss that. Till then, for Rich Catino and John Gaffney, I'm Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching,
Thanks,
everybody.
guys.
See you soon. See you next week here on Ranking the Albums. Grant Arthur will be back. He and I have two episodes planned for you next week, so stay tuned for those and more. I'm Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.